be discussing building omni-channel experiences with Sitecore Experience Edge and mobile Blazor bindings. I'm just going to hop straight in and get started. I've got a bit to cover today. If you've got any questions at any point throughout, feel free just to shout them out, and yeah, I'll try and get to them as I can. So my name's Rob Earlam. I'm part of Sitecore's Technical Evangelism team. Been with the company for about 5 years now in a variety of different roles. We've been working with the Sitecore software for over 14 years now, so very, very long time. Based down in Melbourne, Australia. And as Bala said, this is a picture of me with a pre-pandemic beard. So I think I need to get a new headshot maybe. But let's talk about Experience Edge and how you can build for it. So for those of you who don't know, Sitecore Experience Edge was a product we released earlier this year around January time. And it's basically this super fast delivery layer on top of both Content Hub and Sitecore XM. And with all product releases in technical marketing, we have to figure out a way to try and show this to the community to get a good example of how to work with it. And we realized we basically had all these different developer sites that people went to. We had things like dev.sitecore.net where you could download the software from. We had our documentation site. We have a JSS documentation site. There's the community site. There's the KB site. And they're all kind of scattered about a bit. So we decided to build this Edge portal, which is what you can see on the left. And this is basically, the idea behind it is that it's kind of a shooting off site. So you can go there and it'll take you to the documentation side, or it'll tell you how you can get connected with the community. And it'll also have some latest news and articles and things on there too. So we started to look at how we wanted to build this out, what features we needed, how we wanted to structure it all. And we realized pretty quickly it was going to be mostly static content. Things like the top navigation, those main 3 call to action sections, they weren't going to change much. It's rare we actually release a new target site in Sitecore. So those areas were going to be fairly static. And yeah, as I said, infrequently changing. Because of that, we didn't really want to have to control the whole nav in a CMS like you would do in traditional Sitecore development. It was a bit of overkill, really. That area of the site wasn't going to change much. But we did still have some dynamic content. If you looked at things like the latest articles and the announcement section, you don't want to have to do a new deployment of a site every time that changes. That's crazy. So we wanted to have kind of mostly static, but with some dynamic elements there. This pretty quickly led us to Content Hub and Experience Edge for Content Hub. And this was kind of the perfect fit for it. It meant we could use our DAM, our digital asset management, to save imagery. So things like the Sitecore logo you can see and that keyboard background image on the header banner. And we could use CMP, the content marketing platform, serving its data through Edge, which could then handle the dynamic sections. So those latest articles, each one of those is a content type, a content element in CMP. Same with those announcements as well. So we were looking at how to build this out, and we pretty quickly decided Next.js was the way to go. This was really following the kind of the buzz talk of the moment around Jamstack development, and Next.js with its static site generations, kind of the way that a lot of people are building that. The logo below there is from Material UI, and that is the UI framework that we chose to build out the site with. And we built it out, and it's almost going to go live. We finished most of the development with it now. But as we were working with it, it kind of got me thinking. One of the main value points we've been saying around with Experience Edge is around omni-channel delivery. So being able to have this content served not just from your web channel, but from mobile, IoT, wearables, wherever else you need this content. And while the site we built there is a fantastic example of how to build things out for the web channel, it wasn't really showing omni-channel delivery because we were only working with one channel. So I started to think about how I could show that story. And I quickly settled on a mobile app. If you look at omni-channel today, web and mobile, they're probably the 2 channels you're going to deliver to most frequently. There's lots of people going out to other channels, as I mentioned, like wearables, IoT, voice, all these different areas. But to me, I personally think of web and mobile as being pretty far ahead of the other 2. They're probably the first 2 you're going to tick off. So I started trying to think of how I was going to build out this mobile experience. I wanted it to be an opportunity to test this omnichannel delivery method. That was kind of the key for me. And I was fully aware it was going to be a POC. The site we built in Next.js is going to go live. This isn't going to go live. I'm not going to release these apps to the App Store or anything. It's purely a POC for me to tell tell stories around exactly like this. And this basically got me thinking about how I wanted it all to be structured together. So still, I wanted to serve my basic content out of CMP. I wanted to serve all my imagery out of the DAM. It meant we could still use Experience Edge for Content Hub. I get to tell the story around our new product. And I wanted my two channels there. I wanted my simple website, my Next.js app to serve content to the web. And I wanted to build this mobile app experience. And this is where mobile Blazor bindings came in. It's something I read about kind of late last year. And it was a new technology that Microsoft released, which basically allowed you to embed a Blazor application inside a Xamarin Forms app. So before I go into that too much, I'm just going to quickly recap those two technologies themselves. So for those of you who haven't used Xamarin before, it's basically an extension to the .NET platform. So it gives you a heap of other tools and libraries on top of your standard .NET, which allows you to build applications that target iOS, Android, macOS, even things like Android televisions, like heaps of different channels, which you can build your software for. And the great thing for me, a bit personally, is it's all in C#. C# is my favorite development language. I've used it for a very long time. So it means the barrier to targeting those different channels is a lot lower. I don't have to go and learn Swift and Kotlin and all these other different channel-specific languages at this point. Blazor is Microsoft's newest development UI. So it's basically a framework that allows you to use C# inside of the browser, which is mind-blowing once you start to do it. Obviously, traditionally, for Sitecore development especially, you'd usually use like C# on the server, and then you'd use JavaScript in the browser. So you'd write your app in Angular or React, and that would call through to these API endpoints you make in C# on the server. With Blazor, you can now use C# in the browser as well, which gets compiled down to WebAssembly. It's crazy once you start to do it, but it's really nice as a C# developer, because it means you can now have true code reuse across your stack. So you get all the C# niceness around like strongly typing and things like that. But on top of that, you can share models now between your server side and your browser, your client side application. So it gives you type safety really completely from end to end. It's really nice to work with. And mobile Blazor bindings are a way to combine the two of these. So I will say first that Microsoft still class this as experimental technology. So they're not recommending you run this in production yet, but it's interesting to see where they're taking these two technologies together. But it basically gives you a way to build native and hybrid mobile apps for C#. Using C# and .NET for both Android, iOS, Windows, and Mac. And it basically lets you leverage this Blazor Razor programming model inside your Xamarin application. So if you look at this simple code sample here, this is basically the kind of hello world style example that they use. The stack layout tag is a Xamarin Forms tag, which you specify to like kind of create a layout within Xamarin. But then the elements inside there are Blazor. So we have a standard label and a standard button. And you'll see we have this code block at the bottom. And this is basically how you structure a Blazor component. So this code block here is a discrete set of logic that is basically applied to this component. So here you can see we have a counter, and we're basically outputting the value of that counter in the label. And you can see we have an on-click method in the button, which calls through to that method, just incrementing the counter. So you can see all the logic's composed pretty tightly within that component. And it's a really nice way to work. Okay, so I didn't want to spend too much time on slides today. I definitely wanted to go more into code. So let's take a look at this. I'm gonna share my screen now. Okay. You guys should be able to see my screen, hopefully.
Yeah, really good.
Beautiful. I'll turn off my camera just to save my bandwidth while I show this. Okay, so when you start a mobile Blazor bindings solution, you can just do it with .NET New and it'll create it for you. This is basically the solution structure you'll get. You'll get these 5 projects. And the first 4 you see here are basically kind of subsystem target projects. So we have a project that'll build an application to run on Windows, a project that'll build an application to run on macOS, that'll build an app to run on iOS, and one that'll build an app to run on Android. I'm just going to focus on Android today. I don't need to demo everything 4 times. So that's the one I chose, really. If we look in this target project though, they're all the same pretty much throughout the other three, but there's not much that happens in here. The main activity here is basically a Xamarin Forms element. This is how you build a Xamarin application. It's the entry point, kind of like an app main if you think of C# development. And you can see here, we basically define this as a Blazor hybrid app. We do some basic Xamarin things, setting up toolbars and initializing the Xamarin application. But then the key point is loading this app in. What we do here is we're loading this app class, and that is what's going to basically embed my Blazor application in here. And that's basically it. There's not much Android specific logic in here at all, which is really nice because it means I don't have to build things for Android and then build again for Windows, build again for iOS. You're basically getting a lot of code reuse through this. You can also basically do target subsystem specific overrides though. So you get an index HTML for each where the app's hosted, and you can load in specific style sheets here. So if you do have to do some CSS like tweaking for Android, maybe Android renders things slightly differently to iOS, you can do that to get things pixel perfect, but you don't have to. You can just use shared code throughout if you want. So going back to this app class, where does that come from? Well, that comes out of this basically Edge Portal apps project up here. And this is basically where all of the logic lives here. If we expand this out, this is the app class you can see. For anyone who's worked with .NET Core, now just called .NET, this is going to look very familiar. This is basically how you start a .NET application. And we have basically where we're building our host here. You can see we add all our Blazor hybrid services. We add our services that we've developed in here, we'll look at shortly. I mentioned before that the web application that we built was using Material UI. One of the fantastic things about using Blazor, a web technology in Xamarin, is the fact that there's a Material UI port for Blazor. So I can reuse the same HTML that I created in my Next.js app. I can copy it into here and reuse it again for my mobile app. And these services here are basically importing that Material UI library that I'm going to be working with. Once we start to look in here, you'll see there's a web UI folder. And this is basically where the Blazor UI, the Blazor application itself is going to live. So this is basically a standard Blazor application. If you go into command prompts and do .NET new Blazor, you'll basically end up with what's in this web UI folder if you're building a standalone web app. And this app Razor is an entry point for a Razor application. So this is basically where it all starts. You begin by basically configuring this root handler, which is going to control all of the root binding for you. And you can see here where where the root exists. We found that page. In that case, we're going to render the root out, and we're going to style it with this main layout component I'll show you in a sec. If we don't find it, then it'll execute the not found functionality. This is equivalent to like 404 type scenarios. In here, we're going to use the main layout again, but now we're just going to render out some 404 text, saying that we couldn't find the actual application itself. Couldn't find the root, sorry. You'll notice this is wrapped in a theme provider. Again, that's just coming from the Material UI library I'm working with that allows the components I'm building to be styled. So let's take a look at that main layout. It's pretty empty for me. You could obviously build this out a lot more. In this scenario, all I have in here is my basic nav menu. I don't know if you remember before, we had the Sitecore logo and some top level navigation. That's handled by this nav level component. And after that, we inject the body of the page. So where does this nav menu come from? This isn't obviously a standard HTML tag, and that doesn't exist normally. Well, this is how the component model in Blazor works, and it's really powerful to work with. If you look in this components folder here, you can see basically all the different components I've built, and one of them is called nav menu. So as soon as you build a Razor component in here with Blazor, you can then just use it as a tag, exactly like this. So if I look at my nav menu here, here's my nav menu built out. And for anyone who's used Material UI before, this markup should look pretty familiar. There's some annoyances with it. So there is a grid component that exists in Xamarin as well. So because of that, I have to fully qualify the namespace here. So we get this Material UI starter basically, and then the grid. But it's exactly the standard as working with Material UI. If you were, as I did in the Next.js app. So we have containers and grids. We get our Sitecore logo, and then we have our main navigation parts. You can even see we have some basic UI logic in here. If you think of an application working in a mobile app, you typically have like the burger menu where it'll show the application, show the menu, and you can click to hide it again. And we've implemented that exact logic in here using C#. We basically have a private Boolean variable. So whether the nav menu is collapsed, it defaults to being collapsed. And then we have a property here, setting the CSS class. Basically it says, if my menu is collapsed, then we're going to set it to hidden. Otherwise, we'll output the standard CSS class. We also have a method to toggle this property. So basically, whenever this is called, it'll toggle this from true to false. Now, if we look in the markup, we can start to use those properties in here. So if we look at our main actual nav menu output here, you can see the class here is just outputting that CSS menu property. So whatever this has been set to is going to be output directly in this class. And our onClick method for this button will target that method. So as we click that button, it's going to fire that method every time, which will automatically update this property. And then that'll automatically update the CSS class on here. So it's really nice to work with, especially coming from C#, because like, as I said, as a long-time C# developer, it's really refreshing to be able to use the language I love to update the UI. So this is a pretty basic example. Let's start to look at a page. I haven't implemented the entire site in the app, so I basically just implemented the main homepage just to kind of prove this out. And you can see here we have the sections that we saw on that screen print. We have our hero banner, which had that keyboard image. We have those main call to actions, and we have our news and articles that have been listed. And these, again, are all components that have been built out in this components folder. You can see we're actually starting to pass some properties in here as well. So our hero banner has a title property and a subtitle property. So if I go and load up my hero banner control, you can see here in the code section here now we have properties and they're declared as parameters. And that means that the calling class can basically, Razor template can set those when it's loaded in. And then we just output those values here. So this is how you can start to get component reuse across pages as well. So if I wanted a hero banner with different text being displayed on different pages, this is how you do it. If I created a different page other than Razor, I could load the hero banner in and pass in different title and subtext properties. The call to action cards are all pretty static as well. I'm going to skip past there. But I will dig into the latest news and articles because this is where we've started to deal with the dynamic content. So this is where things get a little more interesting. The first thing you'll notice up here is that we've actually injected a service here. And this is how you can inject logic that exists in external classes. These code blocks at the bottom are really nice if you're doing simple UI logic, things like showing, hiding divs and classes and things. But if you want to do full logic around calling external services, you want to offload that to an external class. You don't want to bloat these code blocks below. So in here, we have a bit of markup, but I'm just going to skip down to the code block first. We have a property again, which is going to be my announcements collection. Again, C#, so it's all strongly typed, really nice to work with. I have my strongly typed announcement object. And then you have this on-initialized async method. And this basically gets fired. This is a out-of-the-box Blazor method, and it gets fired every time a component is rendered. So this is basically fired kind of like a page load type event in old web forms technology. And what we do here is we basically injected this announcement service above. We have a method on there to get my top announcements, and that is going to populate my list property for me. I then have a dirty poll in there to do this every 10 seconds just to show it updating for the demo. Well, then we can utilize this property. So once this is populated, we can use it in the markup as before. So here we have a bit of logic. We're saying if the announcements is null, which it will be when the control first loads, because this method won't actually have fired yet. So if it is null, we're going to fire the else. And it's just going to load me a p time with a loading statement. Once this service completes its action, once we get a response back from the GraphQL query to Sitecore Experience Edge, then this property will no longer be null. At that point, this will switch automatically. So this will switch automatically and it'll start to fire the if statement instead. So then we will iterate through each of my announcements in my announcements collection. And for each one, we're going to render a single component called single announcement. And we're going to pass in that announcement objects as a property to it. So if you take a look in there, here again, you can see my material UI layout here. We've got my parameter with my nice strongly typed announcement object. And here you can see we're outputting my announcement data. So my title, my description, And then we've got a URL and an image and some text. So you can see from the UI perspective, it's really nice to work with. And if we take a look in this service, there's not much really that's specific in there to Blazor or Sitecore. All we're doing here is basically using simple GraphQL.net. We call our Experience Edge endpoint. We set our API token that we generated in Content Hub. And then we run this simple GraphQL query. So this is going to call my announcement results, basically get my announcements results. Only for each one, we're going to get a title, description, URL, the 3 fields that you saw being populated in the UI. Okay, so I think it's probably time we take a look at this in action. So once you load up Xamarin, you'll get some extra toolbar menus here. And you can see we get these Android and iOS menus. And this is how you go about actually testing your code. And so if you load up the device manager here, what you can do is you can actually create these kind of like fake Android devices. So in here, I've created a Pixel 3a, and I've started already. It can be a bit slow to start up at times, but once you do that, you get a fully emulated phone device. It's pretty crazy to work with when you first start with. And for anyone who uses Android daily, this should be very recognizable. And it's a full phone. You can drag and click around exactly like you would do on your phone in your hand. But the cool thing is I can go over to Visual Studio now and I'll set my Android project as my startup project. And I'm just going to hit F5 in Visual Studio. What that's going to do is that's going to go and build my project here, all of these projects. Because I set my Android project to my startup project, it's basically, after it's built it, it's going to compile the Android artifact ready to be run on an Android device. Up here, it's grayed out now because the project's building. You can see we've chosen, just behind here, sorry, yeah. So you can see we've chosen which device we're pushing it to. And that is the emulated Pixel 3 device that I just showed you. So what that's going to do now is it's going to build this code, create an Android artifact. Once it's done all of that, it's going to connect automatically to that emulated Android device. And it's going to push that code over there as an actual Android application. And you'll get full interactivity. You use your mouse as you would do a finger just to move things around. So it's a really nice development experience when you're working with it. It can take a little bit to connect and get the code over there, but it's really simple to get going. You also have full C# functionality you're used to, so like full debugging functionality. You can go and step through the code, exactly the same as you would do when building web or desktop interfaces. So we can see it's come over now, the app's loaded up, and it's just starting to load it up and put the content together. Hopefully, we should see some UI elements shortly. Here we go. Okay. So here we can see we have our nav bar at the top. And here's our burger button menu we set. So we can click on this and we can see that UI toggle's working, changing the class, showing and hiding the menu. We can see we have our header component with the 2 text properties I passed in. We have our call to action sections, our announcements, and here's our dynamic announcement content being pulled out of Sitecore Experience Edge. So it's quite a nice development experience. I was pretty happy when I started working with that. But it got me thinking about how I could do this better. So I'm just going to stop this. There's that stop button gone. There we go. And what it got me thinking was, currently I had the app built in Next.js, and I had my, excuse me, I had my solution here for the apps built in C#. But what if they were both in C#? What if I'd done the web channel in there as well? I'm just going to change over to a different branch here. I can never remember the name of it. Reload the solution. Okay, so things have changed and moved around here a little bit. But what I wanted to test now was, yeah, how would this be different if I built the whole web application in here as well as the mobile application? Because then I could start to get some really interesting reuse scenarios together. So if we look in this app folder, things haven't changed much. We still have my Android, iOS, macOS, and Windows projects. The target specific ones, there's been no changes to that. They're exactly the same. But if I start to look in my mobile Blazor bindings project, in my web UI here, you can see my component folder's gone. I no longer have my component folder in here. I no longer have my services folder in here. I've split those out into a separate project. So what that means is, if I go and look in my nav menu here, you can see I'm still, sorry, in my main layout, you can see I'm still referencing this nav menu component, but it's no longer in this project. If I look at my dependencies here, I have a reference now, a project reference to both the components project here and a data project. If I just expand those, you can see the components project has exactly the components I was working with previously directly in here. And my data project in here is where I separated out my models and my services. So what this means is you can now build these projects basically of components, these component libraries. And this is a special type of .NET project here called a Razor component library, or an RCL. And they were only just supported in mobile Blazor bindings with the latest preview version, but they kind of release a lot of code reuse power here, which I really like. So for example, here, I'm referencing this nav menu component, but it's pulling it in from this referenced component here, this reference component folder. The cool thing about that is if I go into my nav menu here now, there's no Xamarin context in this project. This is just straight Blazor at this point, which means we've now lost this namespace clash. I don't have it clashing with the Xamarin grid component because Xamarin's only aware in here. So that means I don't have to fully qualify these anymore. So my markup's significantly cleaner, much nicer to look at. So if I go in here and I think my emulator's still running somewhere. Okay, yes, it is. So we can fire this up now. I've still got my Android project as my startup project, and we'll execute that. I've also moved the code base along a little bit here. So if you remember the original mockup we had, alongside announcements, there were also some news articles that were being displayed. So I've also added that functionality in here. So going into the latest news and articles components we saw before, we still have my announcements functionality that hasn't changed. I've also added some UI elements to display our latest news. And this is very similar to how the previous piece of functionality works. I'll start with the code again. Now we have another property. We have another property in here for news articles alongside our announcements property. Here you can see we set our announcements coming from our service. And we inject a new service at the top for news. And this time we're getting our news articles. If you look up here, it's pretty similar logic to before. Here we basically check whether we have news articles. If not, we're going to display loading. And while we wait for the response, and once we have it, we're then going to list out each of our news article items. If I look in my news service, very similar to the other one. We're creating a GraphQL client, building our GraphQL query, and then it should have gone over to our application. So we can load this up now. And it takes a little bit for the UI to come in again. Here we go. The top section hasn't changed too much. Oh, I added the keyboard image as well, you can see. So we're definitely moving along a little bit. But now you can see we have our latest news as well. And that is displayed alongside our announcements below. That's pretty cool. I like that. But as I said, I wanted to test how this worked with the web as well. So I'm just going to stop that. And I'm going to turn off my emulator. I don't need that anymore. So if I collapse down some of these now, what you'll notice is I also added this web folder in here. And this project here is a standard Blazor WASM project, Blazor WebAssembly. So what this means is this code here is basically all written in C#, and it's all going to get compiled down into WebAssembly, and it's going to run directly in the browser. So if we look at my pages here, it's kind of pretty similar to what we built out for the mobile app. In here, we have our hero banner, we have our call to action cards, and we have our latest news and articles. You can see here, what I did differently though is if I look in my main layout, I actually wanted a slightly different nav menu. I didn't want to use the shared nav menu that I built for my applications. I wanted one that was a bit more web specific. I didn't need the burger menu in there because it was always going to be displayed. So this time I've added a nav menu component in here, and I've fully qualified that reference to this nav menu. So you can build different heads for different channels and have some shared componentry and not share the other componentry. you can see the UI show and hide logic being removed out of this nav bar. So I'm going to change the start project to this web app now. And if I just do an F5, it's going to bring up a console window. It's going to build out my Blazor WASM project. It should bring us a browser window. And here we go. Here we can see we have our logo. You can see the loading text is displayed. We have our header menu. And here we have our call to actions and our dynamic content loaded down below. But this is really powerful now. So now if you look at this news article section, this announcement section, that's exactly the same code that is running on my web application, that's running on my Android app, my iOS app, my Windows app, and my macOS app. It's not a copy and paste of UI elements like I was doing with the Next.js app before. It is literally the exact same files being used. So if I go back to the projects, let's say I want to update something here. Let's say my news articles now are going to come with an author, for example. I want to start outputting that as well. I'd go in here and I'd update my GraphQL query. I'd go to my article here and I would update my model to include the author field. I'd go into my excuse me, news and articles page here. I'd add the article text into the UI. I then have updated my web channel. I've updated my macOS application. I've updated my Android and iOS mobile applications and my Windows desktop app. So I've basically made my change once and updated all of those channels across. So this is like the dream of code reuse to me. And I think working with Blazor is really the thing that's kind of enabled this. The move from web apps to MVC that was made a few years ago was obviously the right move. Don't get me wrong. MVC is definitely preferable. But the thing we lost in that was this whole like component model. The component model in web forms was way better, I think, than MVC. And we've got it back with Blazor. It's kind of come full circle in that scenario. And these components, these discrete components you can build and just drop in anywhere. It's a really powerful development model. It is. Okay, I think I've kind of waffled on a little bit there. I turn my camera back on here. Let's see where am I? Okay, let's go back to slides. That's kind of everything I wanted to show you today. Don't have any questions? I kind of covered quite a lot quite quickly there. A lot of different technologies.
Hey, this is Ved. Thanks for the presentation again. Because since we heard the Blazor from the Florida Symposium, I guess.
Sorry, you're super quiet, mate. I can't hear you.
Your audio is too low.
Can you hear me okay now?
Not yet. It's still quiet.
Sorry. I'll type in my question.
Maybe you can throw it in the chat. Probably Rob can answer that. Or there is a dial-in number if you want.
So I have a question. Was that the endpoint for the Content Hub that you were using with GraphQL? And is that fairly similar to the endpoint that you would get from the Sitecore, the regular Sitecore, whatever you're calling that now?
So we were going through Sitecore Experience Edge. So that is basically the new delivery layer we launched this year.
Oh, okay.
It's basically a CDN under the hood, really, which provides a GraphQL endpoint. And there's two flavors of it. We have the Content Hub flavor, which I showed you today. So all the dynamic data for the news articles and the announcements were coming out of Content Hub. There is an XM flavor that's coming. I think it's due to release in the next month or two. And that'll be a way to expose basically all of your layout data as well. So it's kind of like a CDN hosted version of the layout service, if that makes sense.
Unmute. Yeah, okay, yeah. So it's kind of just pushing everything up in the cloud, all your content up there, and that's all. Is that all hosted more or less Sitecore SaaS, software as a service, basically, and for the Sitecore world? Yeah.
So on the Content Hub side, then everything's SaaS basically. Content Hub SaaS, the Edge is SaaS. if you're going to do the future XM flavor that's coming soon, basically it's the same XM topology you have today, but the Experience Edge replaces your CD servers. So at that point, you still have your CM and your databases, but we're basically taking over the CD instances. So you don't have to stand those large banks of CD instances we've seen people standing up for performance. You'd use Edge instead, basically, and then you build your heads to call and pull data from the CDN instead of pulling data directly from the CD instances.
Nice.
Okay, so there was one question in the chat, which was, what's the performance side impact of using Blazor compared with other Jamstack front-end applications? So there's two different questions around performance there. Once you get the application loaded in, as I said, Blazor WASM runs in the browser as WebAssembly. So WebAssembly is a first-class citizen. It runs in the same secure enclave in the browser as JavaScript does. It's not compiled into JavaScript. It runs in the same secure area. So for in-app performance, it will run as effectively as JavaScript does. What you're going to see currently with Blazor WASM, sorry though, is there is a larger initial page load size. So because you're using WebAssembly, and it basically has to send a large portion, kind of like of the .NET framework down with it, you're seeing page load sizes of around 8 to 9 meg, I think it was. Can I check this now on my site? Let's have a look. That's probably a good question. Gone. If I refresh that. Okay. Disable caching. It's not coming up now. Yeah, well, basically, it's saying it's around 8 meg, I think was last time I looked. So it is quite a large initial page load size. Depends on what your device you're using, what connection you have, and Microsoft are working to get that down as well. So you got an initial hit basically for the performance to load it, but once the app's been created and running in the browser, it'll run as fast as JavaScript can.
So that means when I'm making, let's say in JavaScript with JSS, I am changing some React code and I'm publishing that code. And I have to just go back to browser, refresh, my code is displayed, whatever I change. But for Blazor, it's not exactly the same way, correct?
It will, so it'll cache elements as well. So there is caching that happens in there. So it won't have to do the full request page. It won't have to download the full amount every time. It's basically the initial hit that'll take it. But what happens is it loads the framework DLLs, and then it actually loads DLLs into the browser, which is pretty crazy when you see it. So that web project I showed you is sent as a DLL down to the browser. So when you do a refresh, it'll re-pull that DLL that I've created, but it won't have to reload the full framework DLL.
Okay. Now, what I was trying to understand is, say, for example, in our MVC project, you have modified view and just publish only the view. It will take fraction of second. But if you modify controller or model, you publish, your DLL publishes, your Sitecore restarts. So then you refresh the website, it will take like 1 minute or 2 minutes or 5 minutes, depending upon your site. It will take some time. So for Blazor, if I make changes in view, like basically my front end Blazor code, so I hope that does not take exactly the same time and Sitecore restarts does not happen, correct?
Yes, that's correct. So this is a completely separate head. Yeah, so it's exactly the same as working with JSS. You're disconnected basically from the main CD instance. Yeah, it's a separate application.
And on server side, it will be same headless mode deployment, or it would be SSR, server side rendering deployment.
So in what I showed you was server-side rendered Blazor.
Oh, okay.
There are solutions to do static site generation with Blazor. I haven't looked into them too much. I know it's a possibility, but yeah, I haven't actually looked into it yet.
Okay, thanks.
Rob, have you been experimented in any Blazor using layout service?
Oh, lots of feedback there. Can you repeat that question? I didn't quite get that.
I couldn't see who was asking that.
I think it was Jared asked, but yeah.
Okay.
Have I used Blazor with the layout service? Not yet. There was a presentation at Symposium 2 years ago, I think, where someone basically wrote a Blazor similar to Blazor SDK, similar to JSS, to pull from the layout service. I don't know if that's been updated for 10 or anything, but it has been done by other people. Yeah. There you go. Nick's posted it in the chat.
Okay. Any other question? Anyone? Okay. It's a pretty good, interesting topic, to be honest. I'm not sure, and I wish it doesn't die like Silverlight, to be honest. Because I was one of the persons who initially worked on Silverlight and WPF at some point. XAML is pretty interesting to work with. But at least Microsoft gets us out of the box and make it more usable. At least they have made better use of Xamarin. It's pretty popular now.
I think the key with Blazor and the difference to Silverlight is there's no browser plugin. This is just using standard web tech. So that was one of the major problems with Silverlight, was the plugin and the bajillion security issues with it. None of that exists here. It's all just WebAssembly. It's all just native web technology. So fingers crossed, that means it should last, hopefully.
Yeah, with the direction that it is going more about the first byte and having it much faster, I'm not sure about 8 meg or 9 meg, as long as they, that's another major thing that they need to work on.
It is, and it's smaller than it used to be. Yeah, they're definitely working on getting it down. So I think that's probably the one drawback you've got with it at the minute, but hopefully they manage to get that down a lot more for sure.